So, the next time you ask an artificial intelligence to write an email for you, or, generate a picture or summarize some huge document, I want you to stop and just think about something for a second.
Think about the actual physical cost of that action.
Exactly, because it feels completely weightless, doesn't it? I mean, you hit enter, and then boom, 3 seconds later, the answer just magically appears on your screen. And we use this term, the cloud, to describe where all this happens.
Which is honestly a brilliant marketing term.
Oh, it really is. It implies this fluffy, intangible, weightless entity just floating harmlessly in the sky above us.
Yeah, and it is arguably one of the most successful illusions of our, modern digital age, because the reality of the cloud, it couldn't be further from a fluffy white vapor.
Right.
It is the heaviest, just most intensely physical infrastructure you can possibly imagine.
Yeah, that single prompt you just typed, it didn't go into the ether. It actually traveled through physical underground fiber optic cables. It was routed into a massive, heavily fortified warehouse, a hyperscale data center, right? Which is likely spanning millions of square feet.
Billions of square feet, yes.
And inside that warehouse, you have thousands of specialized servers that instantly spin up to process your request. And those servers generate a massive amount of physical heat.
Right, which means to keep them from melting down, you need immense industrial cooling systems kicking in, pumping thousands of gallons of water.
Exactly. And every single step of that process requires power, like unfathomable, humming, high voltage electrical power.
And, that electricity has to be generated somewhere in the physical world. It doesn't just exist out of nowhere. It comes from spinning steel turbines, from massive natural gas plants, from controlled nuclear reactions.
Yeah, and then it has to be delivered across miles and miles of physical transmission lines, held up by giant steel and wood poles.
All maintained by human beings working in bucket trucks, often in, frankly, terrible weather.
Right, which brings us to the absolute epicenter of this invisible infrastructure. So today, we are taking a deep dive into a document that proves exactly how heavy the cloud really is. We are unpacking the Q2 2026 earnings call transcript for Entergy Corporation.
And for those who might not know, Entergy is a major utility company. They operate primarily in the Gulf South, so places like Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Texas.
Now, on the surface, if you hear utility earnings call, you might think you're in for a dry administrative update about, kilowatt hours and billing cycles.
Sure, it sounds pretty dense.
Yeah, but if you look at the actual data and the strategic conversations happening in this transcript, you are looking at the exact intersection where the global future of artificial intelligence collides violently with the physical reality of the American electrical grid.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the mission of our deep dive today is to explore this incredible high-stakes tension. We're looking at a regional power company that is suddenly sitting at ground zero of a global tech boom.
A massive tech boom.
Right. So we're going to explore the staggering power demands of these hyperscale data centers. We're going to look at how utilities are trying to force big tech to pay their fair share of the grid upgrades.
And we also had to talk about the physical realities of hurricane-proofing this massive infrastructure, right? Plus the creative financial engineering required to pull it all off without going bankrupt.
Yeah, and we'll get a serious reality check on the future of nuclear energy, too.
It really is a highly complex ecosystem. Every single decision made by the tech giants creates a ripple effect.
Right.
And that ultimately impacts the monthly power bill of, say, a grandmother living in Louisiana, or the economic future of a small town in Mississippi.
Let's start right at the source of the pressure, which is the sheer scale of the demand. When you read the growth strategy outlined by the CEO in this Q2 2026 call, it is heavily, almost overwhelmingly driven by the technology sector.
Yeah, it's undeniable.
Now, they do have a massive traditional industrial base down there. We are talking about steel mills, liquefied natural gas or LNG facilities, and major petrochemical plants like old school heavy industry.
Right.
But the pipeline numbers they mentioned for new data centers are, honestly, they're hard to even comprehend. They cite 7 to 12 gigawatts of potential hyperscale data center projects currently in their pipeline.
And that's on top of another 3 to 5 gigawatts of interest from those traditional industrials.
Right. So I need you to translate that for me, because what does 12 gigawatts actually look like in the real world?
It is a monumental figure. To give you some context, 1 single gigawatt of power is roughly equivalent to the energy produced by over 3 million solar panels.
Oh, wow.
Or, if you prefer, it's roughly the output of a massive commercial nuclear reactor. Basically, 1 gigawatt can power roughly 750,000 homes.
Wait. So if 1 gigawatt powers 750,000 homes, 12 gigawatts is the equivalent of powering what? 9 million homes?
Exactly. 9 million. So when a regional utility says they have up to 12 gigawatts of potential hyperscale data center demand just knocking on their door, they aren't talking about plugging in a few extra servers.
Yeah, clearly not.
Or even just building a few new substations. They are talking about a fundamental reimagining, a massive expansion of their entire grid architecture.
It's like imagine you live in a standard, quiet, suburban neighborhood, right? Everyone has their TVs running, their refrigerators, maybe an electric vehicle charger in the garage, and the local electrical transformer at the end of the street handles it perfectly fine.
Normal load.
Yeah, but now imagine your next door neighbor decides to build a commercial steel blast furnace in their backyard.
That would be a problem.
Right, and they just want to plug it directly into the wall outlet in their living room. The entire grid architecture of that neighborhood would just melt. It would have to be ripped out, redesigned, and replaced with high-voltage industrial infrastructure.
Yeah.
That's essentially what happens when a tech giant drops a hyperscale AI data center into a regional power grid.
That is a very apt analogy. The infrastructure required isn't just an extension of the existing grid, it's a complete transformation.
Yeah.
But, we need to look at how the management team at Entergy is framing these numbers because they are being very deliberate here.
How so?
Well, they refer to this pipeline as indications of interest. They are explicitly probability weighting these figures.
Right.
The CEO, Drew Marsh, actually noted that the real queue size, like the raw number of inquiries they are fielding from tech companies, is much, much larger than that 7 to 12 gigawatt range.
Wow. So what does that mean in practice? Are they just assuming some of these tech companies are bluffing or what?
It's not necessarily bluffing, but it's a gold rush mentality. Right now, artificial intelligence is in a massive expansion phase, and power is the ultimate bottleneck. You simply cannot train the next generation of AI without electricity. So tech companies, the hyperscalers, they're putting out feelers everywhere.
Shopping around.
Exactly. They're making inquiries across multiple states, dealing with multiple utilities simultaneously. They're shopping around to see where they can get the most favorable terms, the fastest construction timeline, and the most reliable connection.
So a utility can't just take every phone call they get as a guaranteed contract.
Precisely. If they started building multi-billion-dollar power plants, every time a tech CEO sent an email asking about capacity, they would massively overbuild the grid.
Right, and then the tech company just signs a deal in Ohio instead.
Exactly, and the utility would be left holding the bag. So they have to probability weight the inquiries. They look at the land the tech company has acquired, their access to water for cooling, their financial commitments, and then they assign a probability to the project actually happening.
But even after doing that conservative filtering, they're still staring down a potential 12 gigawatt addition to their system.
Yeah, it's staggering.
And as we mentioned earlier, the traditional industries aren't taking a break either. I mean, the earnings call noted a 10% jump in industrial sales growth just this quarter.
Right, driven by new and expansion projects really ramping up.
Yeah, we are seeing this macro trend of supply chains reshoring back to the United States. Heavy manufacturing, steel, LNG, they are all booming in the Gulf South because of, access to ports and natural gas. So you have the old economy demanding more power, colliding head-on with the new economy, hyperscale AI, demanding unprecedented power.
Which creates the central tension of this entire deep dive, right?
Right.
Bringing 12 gigawatts of new demand on any grid requires building new substations, massive thick transmission lines, and eventually entirely new power generation plants.
Yeah.
And that infrastructure costs billions upon billions of dollars to build.
Right. And here's where I really have to step in and push back on behalf of you, the listener. Because if I am an everyday residential customer living in Louisiana or Mississippi right now, and I am listening to this, I am terrified.
Oh, absolutely.
I hear that a tech giant worth $2 trillion wants to build a data center the size of a blast furnace in my state. And my very first thought is, am I paying for that? Is my monthly electric bill going to double just so some tech company in Silicon Valley can train a new AI model?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question, yeah. And it is the exact fear that regulators and politicians have. Which brings us to a major strategic policy Entergy discussed in the call.
Right, the pledge.
Yeah, they have branded it their Fair Share Plus pledge. And it represents a significant shift in how this type of corporate infrastructure is funded.
Okay, let's scrutinize this. Fair Share Plus. They state that this pledge is their commitment to ensure that everyday customers actually see a benefit from this data center growth. They claim that starting with their first data center agreement back in 2024, they partnered with elected leaders to force these hyperscale customers to pay the full cost to serve them, plus their fair share of fixed costs.
Exactly.
And the headline number they drop is wild. I mean, they expect $7 billion in customer bill benefits from the agreements signed to date.
I know it sounds like a perfectly crafted piece of corporate PR. The idea that a tech giant building a massive facility is somehow going to benefit your specific power bill, it just sounds counterintuitive.
Extremely.
But if we break down the underlying mechanics of utility economics, the math actually holds up.
All right, explain the math to me, because I hear $7 billion benefit, and my immediate reaction is deep skepticism.
Fair enough.
Corporations don't just hand over billions of dollars out of the goodness of their hearts. So how is this legally and financially structured so that the residential customer actually wins?
Okay, so let's start with the concept of fixed costs. A utility company has massive, unavoidable fixed costs just to exist. They have to maintain the existing power plants. They have to pay their entire workforce, maintain the billing systems, the corporate offices, the legacy transmission lines.
The basics, right.
Think of it as the overhead of running the business. Normally, those fixed costs are divided up evenly among all the current ratepayers. The residential homes, the small businesses, the local factories.
Right, like splitting the rent and utilities with a group of roommates in a massive house.
Exactly. Now, under the Fair Share Plus pledge, when a tech giant wants to move in, the utility is establishing two very strict rules. Rule number one, you pay for your own room entirely. Every single new wire, every new pole, every specific transformer required to connect your data center to the grid, you pay for entirely out of pocket upfront. None of those specific construction costs go into the pool that the existing roommates pay for.
Okay, well, that stops my bill from going up. But where does the benefit come from? How does my bill theoretically go down?
That's rule number two. Because the tech giant is now officially living in the house, and because they are consuming an absolutely massive amount of electricity, they also have to pay a proportionate share of the overall fixed costs. It's the rent for the common areas, the legacy power plants, the corporate overhead. Because their power consumption is so astronomical, their proportionate share of those fixed costs is massive.
So they take on a huge burden of the existing costs.
Yes. This means the total fixed costs of the utility are now divided over a much larger pool of revenue. Mathematically, that lowers the burden or the share that the existing residential and commercial customers have to pay.
Right.
And over the life of these multi-decade contracts, that offset is what generates that projected $7 billion in bill benefits.
Okay, so because the tech company is buying so much power, they absorb a huge chunk of the utility's overhead, which subsidizes the costs for everyone else. That makes sense mechanically. But what really stood out to me in the source material is that this isn't just a voluntary corporate policy anymore.
No, it's not.
It has evolved into a political requirement. The transcript details a very specific alignment happening right now in Louisiana. In late June, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry signed an executive order specifically targeting this issue. And I should note, we are entirely impartial here. We're not taking any political sides or endorsing any policies.
Absolutely.
We are purely analyzing the alignment as it's reported in the call.
And it is a striking alignment of policy. I mean, from an analytical perspective, seeing corporate strategy and state executive policy lock into step like this is incredibly significant. The executive order essentially codifies the principles of Fair Share Plus.
Right.
It mandates that any new data center seeking state sales tax exemptions must provide tangible customer benefits. They must invest in grid resilience, and they must provide meaningful community benefits like workforce development. It explicitly demands transparency and accountability.
And the CEO, Drew Marsh, pointed out that this executive order basically changes the game. He said it moves the standard beyond just setting an expectation to setting an absolute requirement to qualify for those tax exemptions.
Which demonstrates a profound shift in leverage. If you look back over the last 10 to 15 years, tech companies held all the cards when negotiating with municipalities or states.
Oh, yeah, always.
They could walk into a mayor's office and say, we want to build $1 billion data center here, but if you don't give us massive tax breaks, free land, and subsidized power, we'll just build it one state over.
And cities would trip over themselves to offer incentives just to get the headline of a tech giant moving to town.
Right, but the dynamic is completely flipped.
Entirely. Because power is now the scarce resource. The tech companies must build these AI centers, and there are only so many grids in the country capable of handling the load.
Exactly. So now the state government and the utility are in a position to say, no, you need us more than we need you. If you want access to our grid, you must guarantee that you won't raise rates on our citizens, and you must provide local benefits, or you simply don't get the tax exemptions.
The transcript actually highlights Meta's massive investment in Richland Parish, Louisiana, as sort of the gold standard for this new dynamic. Governor Landry held up that specific project as a positive example that perfectly meets these new state requirements.
It's a textbook case.
Yeah, and this alignment isn't just happening at the state level, it goes all the way up to the federal government. The earnings call mentions that Entergy executives, Governor Landry, Meta executives, and even a local school superintendent all attended a ratepayer protection pledge event at the White House.
I mean, think about the different entities involved there. You have a regional utility company, a state governor, a massive multinational tech corporation, and the federal government all publicly agreeing on the exact same framework for infrastructure development.
That level of coordination is incredibly rare.
Very rare. It underscores just how critical this bottleneck is. The political and corporate consensus across the board is that the hyperscalers must foot the bill because the political fallout of everyday Americans paying for big tech's AI expansion would be catastrophic.
Yeah, but even if the tech companies are paying for their specific data center upgrades, the utility still has to maintain and upgrade the rest of the existing grid.
Right, the everyday grid.
And let's be entirely honest here. Operating an electrical grid in the Gulf South is basically declaring a perpetual war on the weather.
It is, without exaggeration, one of the most hostile environments for electrical infrastructure in the United States.
Which brings us to the physical reality of the grid. The transcript mentions that they've already had 2 minor tropical storms hit the service area this year alone.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully, they noted that the restoration costs for those were nominal, and they didn't need to file for any special cost recovery. But they emphasized that severe weather prep is no longer just a hurricane season thing.
No, it's constant.
It is a year-round intensive effort. They are constantly doing vegetation management, inventory, stockpile, and proactive maintenance. And then they dropped a detail about a specific project that absolutely blew my mind.
You mean the Phase 1 Accelerated Resilience Program in St. Bernard Parish?
Yes. St. Bernard Parish, down in Louisiana. They are currently replacing or reinforcing approximately 640 distribution and transmission poles. But they aren't just putting up regular wooden poles like you see in a typical neighborhood.
No, not at all.
They are engineering these structures to withstand wind speeds of up to 150 miles per hour.
Let's just pause on that number for a second. 150 miles per hour. That is not just a bad storm.
No.
That is the equivalent of a strong Category 4 bordering on a Category 5 hurricane. It is devastating, catastrophic wind shear. Building electrical infrastructure to that standard requires an entirely different level of engineering.
How do you even do that? I mean, a standard wooden utility pole snaps like a twig in a Category 4 hurricane.
Well, you move away from standard wood. You're talking about utilizing heavily reinforced concrete, spun concrete poles, or specialized seal monopoles.
Yeah.
The foundations have to be significantly deeper and wider. And the cross arms that hold the wires, they have to be engineered to resist extreme twisting forces. The insulators, the hardware, everything is heavier, denser, and exponentially more expensive than traditional infrastructure.
And it's not just the physical poles they're upgrading. They are also heavily focused on digital resilience. They mentioned this self-healing network program that they started deploying back in 2021.
That program is fascinating.
Yeah, the CEO stated they now have over 400 of these networks in service, covering more than 500,000 customers. And the success metrics they shared are wild. They estimate that over the last 5 years, these self-healing networks have avoided more than 700,000 customer interruptions and saved roughly 80 million outage minutes.
Those metrics are the holy grail of grid modernization. A self-healing network is essentially advanced grid automation.
Okay, break that down for me.
Historically, if a heavy tree branch fell on a power line during a storm, a physical fuse would blow or a breaker would trip to prevent a fire, and everyone downstream of that specific fault would lose power.
Right, your lights just go out.
Exactly. They would stay in the dark until a human being got into a utility truck, physically drove the lines, found the branch, removed it, and manually flip the switch back on.
I always picture the old grid like a massive traffic jam on a highway. One accident in the middle lane, and every single car behind it is stopped for miles with no way to exit.
Right.
But this self-healing network sounds completely different. It sounds like a smart GPS navigation system that's built directly into the roads themselves. Like the absolute second there's an accident, the road instantly communicates, closes off just that one single block, and dynamically reroutes all the traffic to power downside streets and alternate routes, so the rest of the city keeps moving seamlessly.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The system uses a network of sensors, automated reclosers, and SCADA systems, which stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition.
Okay.
When a fault occurs, the sensors instantly detect the voltage drop. The system's logic isolates the exact location of the fault, opening switches to quarantine the damage to the smallest possible number of homes.
Wow. Okay.
Simultaneously, it looks at the broader grid, finds alternate pathways that have spare capacity, and automatically closes other switches to reroute power to everyone else from different directions.
That's incredible.
And it does all of this in a matter of seconds or minutes without a human ever touching a switch. That's how you save 80 million outage minutes. You eliminate the human travel time for the vast majority of the affected grid.
It sounds like the grid of the future. But, here's the catch, and it's a massive one. Engineering 150-mile-per-hour concrete poles and installing advanced sensors for self-healing grid automation is eye-wateringly expensive.
Unbelievably expensive.
And this brings us right back to our everyday customer. How does the utility balance building a futuristic hurricane-proof grid without making the monthly electricity bill completely unaffordable?
That is the tightrope every utility walks. But the stakes are incredibly high in the Gulf South. The management team acknowledged this directly in the earnings call when they started discussing what they call the Phase 1A filing in Louisiana.
Right. They mentioned they are filing for this Phase 1A in the third quarter. They describe it as a smaller intermediate plan designed to bridge the gap between their current resilience program and whatever the next major multi-year phase will be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, you have to ask, why do a smaller intermediate plan? If grid resilience is so important, why not just propose a massive 10-year comprehensive overhaul right now?
Yeah, why not?
The CEO explicitly stated the reason. It's to retain workforce continuity while managing customer affordability.
Unpack that tension for me.
Well, if Entergy tried to build the ultimate bulletproof 150-mile-per-hour grid everywhere all at once, the sheer amount of capital required would cause customer bills to spike to a level that regulators, politicians, and citizens simply would not accept. There would be a revolt.
Right, people wouldn't be able to pay it.
But on the flip side, if they stop building entirely to keep bills flat, two bad things happen. First, they lose their specialized workforce.
No.
The skilled linemen, the structural engineers, the specialized contractors, they won't sit around waiting for work. They will move to Florida or Texas for other projects.
That makes sense.
Second, failing to build resilience now means that when the next Category 4 hurricane inevitably hits, the grid gets obliterated, and the repair bill is astronomical anyway.
So they have to drip feed the improvements. They need to keep the crews employed and working. They need to keep hardening the most vulnerable parts of the grid, but they have to spread the cost out over time so the ratepayer doesn't feel a sudden violent shock to their wallet.
Precisely. It is a delicate pacing exercise. And to help with that affordability, they are actively looking for alternative funding mechanisms that don't hit the ratepayer at all.
Like what?
For example, during the call, they mentioned closing on a $200 million Texas Energy Fund grant. The stated purpose of that money is to strengthen electrical resilience in their Texas territory. But crucially, that is a state-level grant.
Meaning?
It provides capital for grid hardening at absolutely zero cost to the everyday customer.
Oh, that's huge.
They also mention a specific regulatory rider in Louisiana for enhanced vegetation management. This allows them to recover the costs for aggressively trimming trees, which, by the way, is still the #1 cause of outages during storms.
Really? Just trees?
Just trees falling on lines, yeah. The rider lets them recover costs above their 2025 baseline spending for that trimming.
It's a massive, complex balancing act. I mean, you have up to 12 gigawatts of tech demand knocking on your front door. You have hurricanes threatening your coastline, and you have state regulators demanding that you keep the power bills affordable. To pull that off, your financial engineering has to be just as robust, if not more so, than your physical engineering.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
The balance sheet has to be strong enough to absorb these shocks and fund these massive capital expenditures.
Let's transition into the financial engine driving all of this then. When you look at the raw financial numbers from this Q2 call, the results appear very stable, almost boring, which I assume is a good thing for a utility.
Usually, yes.
They reported an adjusted earnings per share, or EPS, of $1.03. Now, they noted this was slightly lower than the same quarter in 2025, but they explained that away quickly. They said it was purely due to the weather. This year was closer to normal temperatures, whereas last year was unusually warm, meaning people ran their air conditioners a lot more, driving up usage.
Exactly. Weather normalization is standard practice when evaluating utility earnings.
Right.
You want to strip out the anomalies of a particularly hot summer or a mild winter to see the underlying health of the business.
And the underlying growth looks very strong. As we mentioned earlier, retail sales growth was positive, driven primarily by that massive 10% jump in industrial sales. And because of that strong base, the management team confidently affirmed their 2026 adjusted EPS guidance and maintained their financial outlook all the way through 2028.
Stability and predictability, those are exactly what investors look for in a regulated utility. But what's truly interesting in this transcript isn't just the EPS number, it's how they are managing their capital to prepare for the massive future demands we've been discussing.
Yeah, this part was wild to me.
And the Chief Financial Officer, Kimberly Fontan, detailed some very significant moves in the equity markets. She noted that in May, they completed a $2.175 billion equity forwards offering.
Okay.
And then in June, they settled 8.7 million shares of equity forwards for net proceeds of $672 million.
Okay, for the listener who doesn't spend their weekends trading exotic Wall Street financial instruments, we really need to translate this. What exactly is an equity forward, and why is it a big deal in the context of building a hurricane-proof grid for AI data centers? Like, why don't they just issue standard corporate bonds to raise money like everyone else?
It's a great question. An equity forward is a highly strategic financial tool. When a company issues stock normally, they sell shares and get the cash immediately, right?
Right.
But doing that dilutes the value of the existing shares right away. An equity forward agreement allows the company to secure a commitment from a bank or an underwriter to buy a specific number of shares at a set price today. But the company doesn't actually have to hand over the shares or take delivery of the cash until a later date, usually within a year or two.
So they are locking in the price and the availability of the cash, but holding off on the actual transaction.
Correct. By doing this, Entergy is securing their access to massive amounts of capital right now, while market conditions are favorable. The CFO explicitly stated that they are managing these instruments to keep their FFO funds, from operations to debt metric, at or above 15%.
And what's special about 15%?
That 15% threshold is a crucial line set by credit rating agencies, like Moody's, to maintain their strong investment-grade credit rating.
So they are essentially padding their financial safety net in advance.
Exactly. The CFO called it financial readiness. I mean, think about the risks they face. If a catastrophic Category 5 storm hits the Gulf Coast tomorrow, or if a massive hyperscale data center suddenly finalizes a contract and demands that 2 gigawatts of infrastructure be built immediately, Entergy doesn't have to panic.
Because the money is already lined up.
Right. They already have the liquidity, they have cash on hand, they have the revolving credit facilities, and they have these unsettled equity forwards waiting in the wings. They can deploy capital instantly without having to scramble to borrow money in the financial markets during a crisis when interest rates might be terrible.
It's like pre-approving a massive line of credit for emergency home repairs before hurricane season even starts. You hope the roof doesn't blow off, but if it does, you aren't standing in line at the bank filling out loan applications while your house fills with water. You just make a phone call, and the money is there.
Precisely. And this highly pragmatic approach to capital isn't just theoretical, it's reflected directly in their physical asset strategy. There was a fascinating exchange during the Q&A portion of the call regarding a power plant called Cottonwood.
Oh, yeah.
An analyst asked the CEO about their plan to acquire this specific plant.
Yes, and this is where the transcript gets really interesting to me, because logically you'd think with all this advanced technology, AI, and hyperscalers coming into the region, Entergy would want to build the absolute shiniest, most futuristic power plants possible to serve them.
You would think so.
But instead, they are actively looking to acquire Cottonwood, which is an existing, older natural gas plant. Why buy old tech?
The CEO, Drew Marsh, gave a very candid response. He didn't try to sugarcoat it. He admitted, we know that Cottonwood isn't the shiniest new plant out there. But he then laid out the economic reality. He explained that acquiring this existing asset is the most economic opportunity for their current customers and for that non-data center industrial growth we talked about, the steel mills and LNG facilities that are expanding right now.
It makes complete sense if you think about it practically. It's like realizing you have a major commercial construction job starting next week, and you desperately need a heavy-duty truck to haul lumber to the job site.
Right.
You could go to a dealership and custom order a brand new state-of-the-art electric truck with all the bells and whistles, advanced autonomous driving, the works, but it's going to cost you 3 times as much, and the dealer tells you it won't be delivered for 3 years due to supply chain issues.
Exactly.
Or you could buy the reliable, slightly older, used gas-powered truck sitting on the lot right now for a fraction of the price. If you need to haul lumber today, you don't care about the bells and whistles. You buy the used truck.
That is exactly the calculation they are making. The CEO pointed out that if they decided to build a brand new combined cycle natural gas plant today, it wouldn't be available to generate power until the early part of the next decade.
Wow, that long.
Yeah. The cost per megawatt would be significantly higher, and crucially, they would be taking on massive construction risks.
Right, with delays and everything.
The current market environment for large-scale construction is incredibly tight. There are massive supply chain constraints for specialized electrical equipment, and there's a severe shortage of skilled labor.
But Cottonwood is already there.
Exactly. Cottonwood is fully built. It exists.
Right.
It can provide reliable power the moment these new industrial customers arrive. It's a pragmatic decision, prioritizing speed to market and customer affordability over having the newest technology.
But of course, making these pragmatic decisions, whether it's buying the Cottonwood plant or building 150-mile-per-hour concrete poles or executing equity forwards, it requires navigating an absolute maze of regulatory paperwork. Reading the regulatory section of this transcript felt like drowning in a bowl of alphabet soup.
Oh, it really is.
We've got DCRF, FRP, riders, netting adjustments, rate cases. It is just so dense.
It is incredibly dense language, and utilities are infamous for their jargon. But we have to decode it because this administrative paperwork is the invisible machinery that dictates exactly what you pay on your monthly power bill.
Yeah.
It determines how fast the utility can afford to send crews out to restore your power after a storm.
Let's translate this for the listener then. Let's start with Texas. The transcript mentioned that Entergy Texas updated its DCRF, which stands for Distribution Cost Recovery Factor.
Right.
And they also got regulatory approval for a capacity cost recovery rider, which stems from some 2025 legislation designed to modernize MISO capacity cost recovery. Let's strip away the acronyms. What does all that actually mean in plain English?
So, to understand why these mechanisms are important, you have to understand how utilities traditionally recovered their costs. Historically, if a utility wanted to build a new asset, say a new neighborhood transformer or a substation, they had to spend the money up front.
Okay.
To get permission to charge customers for that investment and earn the regulated profit, they would have to file a massive, combative legal proceeding called a rate case with their state regulators.
I've heard of rate cases. They sound brutal.
They are essentially full-blown legal trials. The utility has to justify every single penny they spent over the last several years. Interveners, consumer advocates, and industrial groups fight them on every line item.
Wow.
It is slow, it is enormously expensive, and it is highly adversarial. It can take a year or more just to get a decision.
It sounds like having to undergo a hostile IRS audit every single time you want to ask your boss to reimburse you for a basic business expense.
That's a great comparison. So mechanisms like the DCRF in Texas or specific project riders are designed to bypass that combative process for specific pre-approved types of investments.
Ah, I see.
They allow the utility to incrementally recover the costs of building new distribution lines much faster without triggering a massive rate case. It modernizes their cash flow. It allows the utility to continually invest in upgrading the grid because they know they won't have to wait 5 years and fight a legal battle just to get their money back.
Which brings us to the biggest acronym of them all, the FRPs, or Formula Rate Plans. The transcript mentions these across multiple states. Entergy Mississippi's annual FRP resulted in no rate change for the customer.
Right.
Entergy Arkansas filed a historical netting adjustment that actually resulted in a rate reduction for customers. And both Louisiana and New Orleans filed paperwork to extend their current FRPs, 1 year for Louisiana, 4 years for New Orleans. Why are these formula rate plans so desirable that the utility wants to extend them?
Because they provide the ultimate prize in the utility sector, predictability.
Predictability.
Okay. A formula rate plan essentially establishes a pre-agreed mathematical formula for the utility's allowed profit margin, or return on equity. The regulators and the utility agree on the rules up front.
So there's no arguing later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If the utility ends up making too much money one year, maybe because the weather was incredibly hot and everyone ran their AC constantly, the formula automatically kicks in and adjusts rates down for the following year to give that excess back to the customers.
And that is exactly what happened with that netting adjustment in Arkansas you mentioned.
Right. Conversely, if their justified costs go up, the rates adjust slightly upward.
So it completely smooths out the financial relationship between the utility, the regulators, and the customer. Instead of these giant, terrifying rate shocks every 5 years after a brutal legal fight, you have small, transparent, data-driven adjustments happening annually.
Precisely. It is mutually assured predictability. The utility knows they can maintain a healthy balance sheet to fund these massive data center upgrades. The regulators know they aren't going to get yelled at by angry constituents over sudden rate spikes. And the customer knows their bill is relatively stable.
Yeah.
Furthermore, having that predictable regulatory environment is absolutely critical when you're trying to attract 12 gigawatts of hyperscale data center investment.
Oh, that makes sense. A tech company isn't going to invest $5 billion into a data center in a state where the regulatory rules change every 2 years based on who gets elected. They want to know the rules of the road before they commit.
Exactly. Regulatory stability is a massive competitive advantage when recruiting these hyperscalers.
Now, speaking of the hyperscalers and the future of power, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. We cannot talk about artificial intelligence and massive data centers without talking about nuclear energy.
No, we can't.
It is the holy grail for tech companies right now. The AI industry needs massive, continuous amounts of power. They need it running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Nonstop.
And crucially, they all have highly publicized corporate commitments to use zero carbon energy. Solar and wind are fantastic, but they are intermittent. The sun goes down, the wind stops blowing, and you can't just turn off an AI training run.
Right.
Nuclear is literally the only power source on the planet that checks all the boxes. Massive scale, zero carbon, and always on.
And Entergy has a very deep, long-standing history in the nuclear space. They are not newcomers to this.
Yeah.
The transcript notes that their Riverbend station, nuclear plant in Louisiana, just celebrated 40 years of commercial service. Think about that, providing clean, baseload power steadily for 4 decades.
They also mentioned their nuclear operations team winning 4 different Nuclear Energy Institute awards for innovation and operational excellence. The one that really caught my eye was a description of a specific maintenance project.
Oh, the reactor vessel head.
Yeah. They executed a first-of-a-kind replacement of the reactor vessel head through the containment hatch at Arkansas Nuclear 1, and they proudly noted they finished it ahead of schedule. Now, I don't know exactly what a reactor vessel head is, but replacing it through a hatch sounds like trying to perform open-heart surgery through a mail slot.
It is a staggering feat of specialized engineering. I mean, to give you an idea, the reactor vessel is the massive steel structure that holds the nuclear fuel core.
Okay.
The vessel head is the enormous steel cap that seals the top of it. We are talking about a component that weighs hundreds of thousands of pounds. It operates in a highly radioactive environment under immense pressure and heat.
So it's not something you just unscrew and swap out on a Tuesday?
Not at all. Replacing it requires moving this massive, incredibly heavy, and highly sensitive piece of equipment out of the reactor building. Usually the containment buildings are designed with equipment hatches, but they are incredibly tight clearances.
I can imagine.
Moving something that large, with precision, using specialized cranes, all while maintaining strict radiological safety protocols and ensuring absolute structural integrity. It requires months of planning and flawless execution. Doing it faster than scheduled and winning an industry award for it is a testament to the highly specialized, highly disciplined engineering talent they have running their existing fleet.
Wow.
Maintaining these older plants to run safely and efficiently for decades is just as important as building new infrastructure.
But of course, the real question on everyone's mind, from Wall Street analysts to the tech CEOs, is new nuclear, building the next generation of reactors.
Yeah, that's the big one.
During the Q&A portion of the earnings call, an analyst asked point blank about the recent federal and state announcements regarding nuclear advancement. They specifically brought up Louisiana Governor Landry and the Department of Energy advancing negotiations on nuclear life cycle innovation and advanced reactor deployment in the state. The analyst essentially wanted to know, is this real? Are we actually seeing movement toward breaking ground on new nuclear reactors to power this AI boom?
And this is where CEO Drew Marsh stepped in and delivered a very necessary, very sobering dose of reality to the market.
He didn't mince words.
No, he didn't. He acknowledged the excitement. He acknowledged the potential for creating thousands of highly skilled jobs in Louisiana if they can secure this Department of Energy work, which, to be clear, primarily focuses on the supply chain, the components, and the manufacturing that support the nuclear industry, not necessarily building a plant right away.
Okay.
But when it came to the prospect of Entergy actually launching the construction of a new nuclear power plant, he tapped the brakes incredibly hard.
Yeah, the analyst pressed him, asking if this was something we might see on a 2026 or 2027 timeline. And Marsh essentially said, no, we don't have a firm timeline, and we aren't anywhere near where we need to be to make that kind of decision just yet.
If we step back and connect this to the bigger picture of the American energy sector, his caution is entirely justified. Building a new, traditional nuclear power plant in the United States today represents an almost insurmountable financial risk for a regulated utility.
Really? Insurmountable?
Yes. The upfront capital required is astronomical, often tens of billions of dollars. The regulatory approval process with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission takes years, if not decades. And if you look at the most recent attempts to build new traditional reactors in the U.S., like the Vaughtle plant in Georgia, they have been plagued by billions of dollars in cost overruns and massive multi-year delays.
So a regional utility, even one as large as Entergy, cannot just decide to build a new nuclear plant on speculation because a tech company might want to power in 10 years. The financial risk would destroy their balance sheet.
Exactly. If they take on that construction risk and the project goes billions over budget, who pays for that? The regulators won't let them pass that cost onto the everyday residential customer. So the utility's shareholders take the hit.
Yeah.
Marsh reiterated a specific phrase multiple times during the call when discussing new nuclear. He said it must be customer-led.
Customer-led?
He stressed over and over that they must protect the balance sheets of their operating companies, and above all, they must protect their existing retail customers from the financial risks of new nuclear development.
So what does this all actually mean? Because it exposes a fascinating high-stakes paradox at the heart of the AI revolution. Everyone, the tech giants, the politicians, the public, the utility companies, everyone wants clean, 247 power for artificial intelligence.
Right.
And everyone agrees that nuclear is the most obvious, perhaps the only answer. But nobody's actually willing to write the multi-billion-dollar blank check to take on the staggering construction risk of building the first one.
That's the paradox.
When the utility CEO says it must be customer-led, they are essentially looking directly across the table at the $2 trillion tech companies and saying, look, if you want nuclear power so badly to run your AI, you have to guarantee the financing. You have to take the risk.
That is exactly what they are saying. It is a game of financial chicken on a global scale.
Wow.
The utilities are holding firm. Until a hyperscale customer, a Microsoft, an Amazon, a Google, or a Meta is willing to step up, sign a binding contract, and underwrite the financial risk of the inevitable cost overruns and construction delays, new nuclear development by regulated utilities will remain exactly where it is today in the planning, discussion, and pilot phase.
So we're at a stalemate.
Pretty much. Small modular reactors, or SMRs, might change that math eventually, but for now, the risk is simply too great for the utility to bear alone.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps the most important piece of the puzzle. We've talked about the tech giants in Silicon Valley, we've talked about the utility executives, and we've talked about the state and federal regulators. But what does this massive industrial boom actually look like on the ground? What is the real-world impact for the communities living in the Gulf South?
Well, according to the macroeconomic indicators cited by the management team in the call, it looks like an unprecedented economic boom. The CEO stated that their 4-state Gulf South corridor is currently benefiting from a massive, sustained construction and manufacturing expansion.
Right.
They noted that both GDP and non-farm payrolls in the region are currently sitting at 20-year highs.
And they gave some very specific real-world examples of how this macroeconomic data trickles down to individual human beings. This was honestly my favorite part of the class.
In great detail.
They mentioned Richland Parish, Louisiana. This is a rural community. It's not a major metropolis. But thanks to the massive expansion of the local tax base, which was directly supported by Meta's data center investments in that parish, the local school district is seeing a windfall. They reported that teachers in Richland Parish are receiving bonuses of up to $50,000.
A $50,000 bonus for a rural school teacher is not just a nice perk. It is genuinely life-changing money.
Seriously?
It is the kind of capital that allows a family to buy a home, send a kid to college, or clear their debt. It completely alters the economic trajectory of that individual family, and by extension, that local economy as they spend that money locally.
And it's not just the tech data centers driving this. They mentioned a circuit breaker manufacturing facility that is expanding its operations in Mississippi. They are expanding specifically to serve the growing local and regional infrastructure needs, building the components needed for all this grid hardening we've talked about.
Right.
That brings more manufacturing jobs and more property taxes to Mississippi. Over in Southeast Texas, where the LNG facilities are rapidly expanding, they noted that those industrial companies are actively funding new college and workforce development programs. So local residents can get the specialized training and skills required for lucrative, decades-long careers in that industry.
It's an entire ecosystem growing up around this.
Yeah. Entergy was even named to the Civic 50 list as the utility sector leader for community engagement. When you hear all of this, it paints a picture of a rising tide lifting all boats.
It does paint a very positive picture. However, as analysts, we have to look at the full landscape. Any infrastructure development of this massive magnitude is going to generate friction. It is unavoidable.
Right.
And during the Q&A, one of the analysts brought up the nationwide trend of pushback and NIMBYism, the not in my backyard sentiment.
Right. Because as much as people love the idea of $50,000 teacher bonuses and a booming local economy, absolutely nobody wants a massive high voltage transmission line cutting across their backyard, ruining their property value.
Exactly.
And nobody wants a sprawling, humming data center built right next to their quiet residential neighborhood. The analyst specifically asked how Entergy is dealing with this local opposition, pointing out a very prominent example. The city of New Orleans currently has a moratorium on data centers.
This is a crucial tension point, and it's one that often gets glossed over in corporate presentations. Entergy is currently in the process of building over 1,000 miles of new transmission lines.
1,000 miles, that's huge.
They were fundamentally rewiring the physical geography of the Gulf South. You simply cannot do that without upsetting some people. The CEO addressed the New Orleans moratorium directly. He didn't dismiss the local concerns or treat them as an annoyance.
Okay, what did he say?
He contextualized it, comparing the current data center pushback to the historical opposition they've seen when trying to site natural gas plants or even large-scale solar facilities.
But how do they actually get past a citywide ban? If the city council says no data centers, what is the utilities move? Do they just go to the state legislature and try to get a law passed to override the city?
No, because trying to bulldoze through with state-level preemption often creates more hostility and longer legal battles. The strategy they outline is direct, localized engagement. When faced with a moratorium, they have to sit down with the stakeholders and address the specific granular concerns.
Make them feel heard.
Right. Why are residents terrified of a data center? Often it's about the massive amount of water they consume for cooling, which strains municipal water supplies. It's about the acoustic noise of thousands of industrial cooling fans running 247. It's about the visual blight of the transmission lines.
Those are all very valid concerns.
They are. The utility has to address those engineering concerns directly and then crucially demonstrate the economic engine these facilities represent. By pointing to verifiable successes like Richland Parish, they try to shift the narrative.
I see.
They try to prove that the infrastructure isn't just an eyesore or a drain on local resources. It's the funding source for the community's future schools, roads, and services.
But that requires a level of local trust that takes decades to build and only a moment to lose. You can't just parachute into a community, demand they host a massive data center, throw some PR jargon at them, and leave.
No, absolutely not.
You have to prove definitively that the Fair Share Plus pledge is real. You have to prove that it actually results in better schools, stronger roads, and a more resilient local grid, rather than just enriching a tech company in California.
Exactly. The social license to operate is just as critical as the regulatory permits. And really, that is the overarching narrative of this entire earnings call. It is the story of managing a massive, multifaceted, almost overwhelming transition.
Yeah.
You have a regional utility trying to balance the insatiable, limitless demand of the digital future with the harsh, unforgiving physical realities of extreme weather. They have to balance the financial constraints of everyday ratepayers with the deeply personal concerns of local communities. It is a balancing act of epic proportions.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Let's take a moment to just recap the incredible journey we've just taken. We started by looking past the illusion of the weightless cloud, exposing the invisible, heavy infrastructure behind our digital lives.
The blast furnaces, as you said.
Exactly. We found a regional utility company sitting on a potential 12-gigawatt pipeline of tech demand, forcing a complete reimagining of the grid. We saw how the Fair Share Plus pledge, backed by state executive orders, is actively forcing big tech to pay for their own grid upgrades, theoretically creating projected billions in customer benefits.
We also explored the engineering marvels and the economic paradox of building 150-mile-per-hour concrete poles while fighting desperately to keep monthly bills affordable.
Right.
That tension led to pragmatic, real-world choices like bypassing shiny new technology to buy the used truck Cottonwood gas plant just to meet immediate demand.
We navigated the dense regulatory mechanisms, the FRPs and riders that make all this investment legally possible. We confronted the massive financial reality check holding back the dream of new nuclear development, realizing it's a high-stakes game of financial chicken.
And finally, we saw the profound transformative impact this boom is having on local communities, from life-changing teacher bonuses to the inevitable friction and valid pushback of local residents.
It is a comprehensive look at the physical engine powering the next era of human technological advancement. So, what does this all mean? As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we've discussed today.
Okay.
We constantly hear about the tech giants, the AI developers, the social media empires, the hardware manufacturers in Silicon Valley. We tend to think of them as the most powerful entities in the world. We view them as the undisputed architects of our future.
They certainly dominate the cultural conversation, and they absolutely dominate the financial markets.
But think about the hidden leverage we've uncovered today. If these $2 trillion tech empires absolutely require 12 gigawatts of physical power just to survive, if they cannot launch their next revolutionary AI model, if they cannot generate a single line of code without access to a physical, heavily engineered electrical grid, are they really the ones in ultimate control?
That is the question.
Or are the regional utility companies, the ones who actually own the physical poles, the copper wires, the nuclear plants, and who control the regulatory chessboard, are they actually the silent kingmakers of the 21st century?
It is a fascinating perspective to consider. The entire digital revolution, with all its promises of artificial intelligence and virtual worlds, is entirely tethered to the physical world.
Completely tethered.
And the gatekeepers of that physical world have more leverage right now than perhaps at any time in the last century.
It's something to think about the next time you type a simple prompt into an AI or casually send an email to the cloud. Behind that seemingly weightless magic, there's a very real, very heavy world of spinning steel turbines, 150-mile-per-hour concrete poles, and high-stakes corporate negotiations determining exactly who holds the power. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking deeper into the invisible infrastructure powering your digital life, and we'll catch you on the next one.